And how's it going, everyone? It is Skullzi here with the latest and the greatest gaming news. Today I want to talk about the one select quote from Todd Howard that gets me ever more hyped for Starfield. Even listening to it again almost 2 years later, it is crazy to think that the most interesting sentence we ever heard from Bethesda regarding Starfield happened way back in 2018, but the fact that this quote is still lingering over the community after so long shows just how much hype there is for a game that we basically know nothing about. I wanted to touch on this quote today because after nearly 2 years later it holds just as much potential hype in its words as it did before, maybe even a little bit more. And although Bethesda Game Studios has been making some pretty questionable decisions at best lately, I still have high hopes for Starfield and I firmly believe that the game will be amazing. And there is one main reason for this split between two determining factors, and that main reason is Todd Howard. Starfield is Todd Howard's dream project, a game that he has been wanting to make for years upon years. There are a couple key pieces of evidence to support this that I have already broken down in previous videos. The first being a leaked email from Todd Howard talking about how a game like Starfield would be amazing. And the second is The 10th Planet, a previous cancelled Bethesda game back in the mid-1990s that was way too ambitious and ahead of its time. A game that seemed to be similar to Starfield in some ways, and it was Todd Howard's first attempt at something like Starfield. Only Todd Howard wanted to push the boundaries so hard that the game would have been near impossible and super expensive to even make. He seemed to learn this lesson well way back then and carried it into his future years in gaming development though, because one of the key reasons we won't get the Elder Scrolls 6 for quite a while is because, as Todd Howard said himself, the technology to make the game doesn't quite exist yet. Although that quote was a while ago, so I'm sure the technology to make the Elder Scrolls 6 exists now. Seeing how Starfield is supposedly almost finished, I'm sure they've already started development for the Elder Scrolls 6. And apparently the technology to take another shot at Starfield exists too, and Todd Howard seems to not be holding back at all this time. Whatever grand ambitions he has had for his dream project over the years, it seems very likely that most if not all of his ambitions may actually happen, as Starfield is almost set to be the game with the longest development cycle that Bethesda Game Studios has ever made. That means although it will be the usual Bethesda Game Studios open world RPG game we can expect, clearly they are going above and beyond somehow with content in this game, and I highly doubt it's any of that No Man's Sky procedural generation. And that brings me back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the video, the one single quote that has stood out to me the most regarding Starfield, the one official statement not only from Bethesda Game Studios but literally from Todd Howard, and the statement that gets me the most hyped for Starfield even 2 years later.
But how much thought we've given it for a long time. So on that original list, Fallout, the biggest, most epic science fiction thing you could possibly imagine.
The biggest, most epic science fiction thing you could possibly imagine.
Nice.
The biggest, most epic science fiction thing you can possibly imagine. I am sure many of you remember this quote, but if you let it settle in, even after 2 years later, it still hits heavy with that hype. Sure, Todd Howard has talked his projects up before, but to refer to Starfield as the biggest, most epic science fiction thing you can possibly imagine, like, what? That is bold talk. And judging by Todd Howard's reaction to what he just said, he seemed to have meant it. I picked up on some of those vibes of feeling good that he can finally talk about Starfield, mixed in with the reality that they really need to meet these expectations and live up to the hype. And judging by how long and how quiet they have been about the game, I'd say Bethesda is allowing Todd to try to meet those expectations at least as much as possible, and we have had no confirmed indications that Starfield is being rushed in any way or suffering from any form of internal development issues. So with that in mind, what does that even mean? The biggest, most epic science fiction thing you can possibly imagine? I mean, we already had Mass Effect, one of the greatest gaming stories ever told in the sci-fi universe, set with amazing characters as well, a game I will never forget and one of my all-time favorite gaming trilogies ever. That's right, I'm not including you, Andromeda. And then we had the endless universe exploration thing with No Man's Sky. We got Elite Dangerous and other similar games for a more realistic approach to trying to make a living out in space. We got Star Citizen that apparently still exists. planets. So what exactly would set Starfield apart as being the biggest, most epic science fiction thing we can possibly imagine? Is it a combination of elements from all of these games I just listed, or is it something new that nobody has thought of yet, that no game has ever done? Personally, I don't think it's going to be any procedural generation stuff like No Man's Sky. Bethesda Game Studios does use a bit of procedural generation, but only to fill in randomly generated quests or plant coverage and stuff around the game world. I doubt they will use procedural generations to make entirety of planets. Maybe they'll use it to make like barren planets, maybe they'll use procedural generation to make moons and stuff, the planets that won't have anything interesting on them and will be completely barren, but at the same time I highly doubt that the planets in Starfield will be complete, entire, gigantic planets. It seems more that you would have just smaller sections that you can explore, similar to the Outer Worlds, but again, Todd Howard said this would be the greatest science fiction thing we could ever imagine, and when I think of the greatest science fiction thing ever, I don't imagine only small explorable sections of planets, but who knows? Thoughts like these is why even 2 years later, this single quote from Todd Howard is leading the charge for my hype for this game. My mind is just racing, trying to piece together the mysterious entity that is Starfield and what this game will finally be. Either way, with the promise from Bethesda that Starfield will be a single-player, open-world, massive RPG game that we'd come to expect from Bethesda Game Studios, along with that now legendary quote about the game direct from Todd Howard, I'd say it's safe to say that even 2 years later, the hype is assuming direct control. As always, what I want to know is, what do you have to say about all of this? Does this quote still get you as hyped as it did 2 years ago? Let me know down in the comments below, and if your comment wins the internet and may get featured in a future video. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy the content. Be sure to subscribe and turn notifications on if you want to stay in the know when it comes to the latest gaming news. Follow me over on Twitter for channel updates and other news that don't make it into my videos, and check for links down in the description below for official Skullzi merchandise, the official Skullzi Discord chat server, and links on how to be an exclusive channel member over here on YouTube or on Patreon. And as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to tune in next time when it's Todd time.
It just works.